After 20 years of marriage, you think you know someone. You know how they take their coffee, the way they hum when they're folding laundry, the slight twitch in their left eye when they're lying. But nothing prepares you for the day your wife walks in through the front door at 11:17 p.m., cheeks flushed, hair slightly tousled, a soft, dreamy smile playing on her lips, and you realize that smile isn't meant for you. She didn't even notice me at first. I was sitting in the dark, on the edge of our couch, TV off, phone untouched, the kind of stillness that's almost violent. "Hey," she said, slipping her shoes off with a giggle. A goddamn giggle. "Didn't mean to wake you." I didn't answer right away. Just watched her, watched the way she leaned against the wall like her knees were made of jelly. I didn't know whether to speak or to scream. "You weren't sleeping," I said. Flat. Measured. The only way I knew how to keep the quake in my chest from spilling out. That's when she finally looked at me. Her eyes widened for a split second, barely noticeable, unless you spent half your life watching someone blink. "Oh," she said. And then, more carefully, "You're up." We stared at each other in the dim light bleeding in from the kitchen. She was wearing that green blouse I always said made her look like spring. She hadn't worn it in years. "Where were you?" I asked. She hesitated. "Not long. Just enough to cut me open. Out. With Emma." You remember Emma. I did remember Emma. Emma moved to Chicago 3 years ago. And just like that, the last thread snapped. I stood up slowly, my body numb, but my mind racing. "Don't insult me, Claire." She froze. Something flickered across her face. Guilt? Fear? No. It was regret. But not the kind that says I'm sorry. The kind that says I wish you hadn't found out. "Who is he?" I asked. She looked down at her shoes. Her voice was barely a whisper. "It's not what you think." I laughed. Actually laughed. A bitter, hollow sound that didn't feel like mine. "You come home smelling like Dior and red wine, glowing like a teenager, and it's not what I think?" She took a step toward me, her voice cracking. "Let me explain." "No," I said, stepping back. "No. You've had years to explain. You've had 20 birthdays, 20 anniversaries, 2 children, a mortgage, 1,000 little moments where you could have said something. But you saved it for tonight." Silence. That silence, it stretched, thick and suffocating. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the wind outside brushing against the window panes. I felt it then. The shift. Something inside me unclenched, but not in a good way. It was the kind of release that comes when you stop holding on to a rope that's been burning your hands. "You love him?" I asked, finally. She looked up at me, and for once, she didn't lie. She nodded. It was strange how calm I felt in that moment. Like my heart had finally stopped fighting the truth and just let it wash over me. I sat back down on the couch, leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You remember that trip to Vermont?" I said, staring at the floor. "The cabin, the snowstorm, the fireplace?" She nodded slowly, wary. "Yeah, of course. That's when I knew I loved you," I said. "Not just loved you, knew it. We had no heat, no electricity, and you made jokes about dying in a Hallmark movie. I remember thinking, this is it. This is home." I looked up at her. "Was I ever that for you?" She didn't answer. And that told me everything. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there in the living room long after she went upstairs. I could hear the creak of the bed as she lay down, the soft thud of her phone on the nightstand, probably checking for a text. From him. 20 years. 2 decades of shared history, of holidays, of heartbreaks, of holding each other's hands through miscarriages and milestones, and she unraveled it all with one nod. But here's the thing no one tells you. Betrayal doesn't come like a bomb. It comes like a hairline crack in your windshield. Tiny. Almost invisible. Until one day, it spiders across the whole damn thing, and you're staring at the wreckage wondering when exactly it got that bad. And me? I wasn't done watching it crack. I was going to follow it to the end. I didn't confront her again the next day. I couldn't. I woke up, or more accurately, peeled myself off the couch, somewhere around 6:30. The house was still quiet, like it hadn't yet remembered it was supposed to be a home. I heard her in the kitchen. The familiar sounds, kettle boiling, the soft clink of a spoon against her favorite mug. That morning routine we'd done for years. She was playing it like a scene in a movie we both knew by heart. Only now, I was watching it from outside the screen. I didn't say anything when I walked in. Just grabbed a mug, poured some black coffee, and sat down at the table like I hadn't spent the night memorizing the shape of her silence. She looked up at me, cautiously. Her face was puffy. Eyes red. She'd been crying. I wanted to feel something about that. Sympathy, maybe. Or relief. I didn't. I just said, "Kids getting up soon?" She nodded. Yeah, Jamie's got soccer practice. Lila needs help with her science project. We didn't speak after that. We just sat in the hum of everything unsaid, sipping from cups that suddenly felt too small to hold anything worth keeping. It's a strange thing, how life insists on continuing, even when everything inside you is breaking. The kids came down, oblivious. God, thank God they were oblivious. Jamie talking a mile a minute about some goal he scored in practice the day before. Lila asking if I remembered to buy poster board for her volcano model. I smiled. I joked. I played the part. And Claire? She did too. Like nothing had happened. Like the moment she confessed to loving someone else had been a bad dream, one we both silently agreed not to mention in daylight. But I noticed little things. She didn't kiss me goodbye when she left for work. That used to be automatic. Like breathing. She didn't ask me if I needed anything from the store. Didn't call to check in. At 11:13 a.m., I walked into our shared Google Calendar. Her entries were always color-coded. Emma, lunch, stood out in blue. Emma. Right. I opened a blank document and stared at it. I don't know what I thought I'd write. A list of questions? A goodbye letter? A revenge plan? I don't even know how long I sat there before my fingers moved. All I typed was, she smiled when she came home from him. I stared at that sentence for what felt like hours. It was then I realized something that chilled me to the core. She wasn't conflicted. She wasn't torn between two people, wringing her hands, begging the universe for clarity. No, Claire had already chosen. She just hadn't told me yet. But here's the kicker. When someone's already left you emotionally, physically leaving is just paperwork. That night, I followed her. Yeah, I know how that sounds. Creepy. Desperate. But when your world starts cracking, you either try to hold it together or you follow the fault line to see where it leads. She said she had to work late. Budget meetings. She wore makeup. The green blouse again. I wanted to scream. I waited 15 minutes after she left, then grabbed my keys and followed her. No plan. Just pain. She drove downtown, parked near the Riverwalk. I watched her step out of the car like she was walking into a second life. And then he appeared. You never forget the first time you see the man your wife is in love with. He was tall. Not movie star handsome, but confident. Clean cut. Business casual. She smiled when she saw him, the same smile she used to give me when I picked her up for dates 20 years ago. They hugged. Too close. Too familiar. And then, right there under the street lamp, he touched her cheek. Just a quick, intimate brush. I felt something twist inside me. Not just jealousy. Displacement. I was watching someone else live my life. I left before they saw me. Drove to a gas station, sat in the car, and stared at a row of Doritos like it held the meaning of life. That was the first time I let the truth in. Not the obvious truth that she was cheating. That part was clear. No, I mean the real truth. The one that slams into your chest like a sucker punch. That maybe, just maybe, she hadn't been happy for a long time. And I had no idea. I went home. Sat in the dark again. When she came in, late, of course, I didn't say a word. Neither did she. But I noticed something different this time. She hesitated at the door. Looked around like she expected me to be waiting. That's when I knew she could feel it too. The quiet before the storm. But here's the thing about storms. They don't care if you're ready. They come anyway. The morning after I followed her, I woke up to the sound of her humming. Claire always hummed when she was nervous. She thought it made her seem calm, in control. But to me, it was a siren blaring. It meant something inside her was coming undone, even if she was smiling while doing the dishes. She didn't know I had seen them. Not yet. But I think some part of her sensed the balance had shifted. The silence between us wasn't just awkward anymore. It was loaded. Like a gun on the table, we were both pretending not to notice. I watched her pour cereal for the kids, tie Lila's shoes, laugh at one of Jamie's ridiculous jokes like everything was normal. It was impressive, really. The performance. The routine. The illusion. She even turned to me and asked if I could pick up groceries after work. Like we were just husband and wife. Still on the same team. I said yes, of course. What else could I say? But when she left the house, when the kids were off to school, I stood in the kitchen staring at the half-empty coffee pot and thought, I don't know this woman anymore. And then, did I ever? It's easy to build a life with someone and miss the signs. You tell yourself things are just a phase. You explain away the cold shoulders, the half-hearted kisses, the I'm just tired excuses. You tell yourself love changes, and maybe it does. But not like this. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Or maybe things I had just trained myself not to see. The locked phone. The new underwear stuffed behind old laundry. The sudden gym membership. The way she started waxing lyrical about personal growth and reinventing herself. The Claire I married read historical fiction, loved documentaries, hated hiking, and couldn't stand sushi. Now? Now she was posting pictures of California rolls and mountain trails on Instagram like she'd been reborn. But the most damning change? Her laughter. It was different. Sharper. Like she was laughing with someone else's voice. One that didn't need me anymore. I couldn't take it. I needed someone to talk to, but I couldn't bear the humiliation of telling a friend. Or worse, my brother. He'd always warned me that Claire was a little cold. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of being right. So I drove. No destination, no plan. Just miles and miles of asphalt and the sound of my own heartbeat getting louder in my ears. And that's when I found it. A little cafe on the edge of town. One of those hipster places with Edison bulbs and hand-drawn menus. I went in, ordered black coffee, sat near the window, and stared at nothing. She walked in 20 minutes later. Not Claire. Her. The waitress. She wasn't particularly beautiful in the conventional sense. But something about her struck me. Maybe it was the way she moved. Confident. Like someone who knew what it meant to be broken and kept walking anyway. She brought my coffee, smiled politely, and said, "Rough morning." I didn't answer. Just nodded. She didn't press. Just walked away. But that one moment, that flash of human connection, it undid something in me. I came back the next day. And the next. I didn't know what I was looking for. Distraction? Hope? An escape hatch? Maybe just someone to see me. The fourth time I came in, she sat across from me during her break. "Tessa," she said, holding out her hand. "David," I replied, shaking it. We talked about the weather, music, the weird old guy who always orders triple espresso shots and mutters about aliens. Nothing deep. Nothing dangerous. Until I slipped. She asked me how long I'd been married. I paused. Too long. Then I told her the truth. 20 years. "Wow," she said, stirring her tea. "That's rare these days." Still happy. I looked at her. Really looked. And I said the most honest thing I'd said in months. "I don't know anymore." She nodded. No judgment. Just understanding. That moment? It was the first time in weeks I didn't feel like I was drowning. But here's the thing. Tessa didn't save me. She didn't try. She wasn't there to fix me or patch up the holes Claire had torn through me. She was just real. And when everything in your life feels like a performance, realness becomes oxygen. I left the cafe that day feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. Not about Tessa. About Claire. Because now, I knew what I had to do. The storm wasn't just coming anymore. It was here. And I was done pretending I wasn't soaked to the bone. There's a strange thing that happens when you make up your mind to confront someone you love. Time slows down, but your heartbeat doesn't. Everything that used to be ordinary starts feeling like a setup. The way she refills the sugar jar. The way her keys jingle in the lock. The sound of her footsteps upstairs, they all feel like part of some larger, twisted choreography. By the time Friday rolled around, I decided I wasn't going to wait anymore. She came home at 6:42 p.m. A little later than usual, but not enough to raise suspicion with anyone but me. I've been tracking it for weeks now. The late meetings. The after-work errands. The lie had grown legs and learned how to walk. I was in the kitchen, cutting vegetables. Steady hands. A kind of eerie calm had settled over me, like I was observing someone else's life. "Smells good," she said as she dropped her bag by the door. I didn't answer. Claire walked over, pressed a soft kiss to my cheek. It felt out of place. Like she remembered she was supposed to love me in this moment and just went through the motion. "We need to talk," I said. That froze her. She didn't pull back right away, but I felt her tense. Like a boxer hearing the bell. "Okay," she said slowly, her voice careful. "Too careful. After dinner?" "No," I said. "Now." We sat in the living room. I left the vegetables untouched on the cutting board, still half an onion peeled, the knife resting beside it. It all looked like a paused scene in a movie. She sat across from me, crossed her legs, exhaled. I didn't yell, didn't accuse. I just asked, "How long has it been?" She didn't pretend to not understand, didn't play dumb. She looked me dead in the eye. 6 months. There it was. The truth. Naked. Brutal. "And you love him?" She hesitated. Just for a beat. But I knew. "I don't know," she whispered. "Bullshit," I said, quietly. "You smiled when you came home from him." She looked away. That broke me more than any confession. You know what the worst part is? I said. It's not the affair. It's not even the lying. It's the fact that you let me live in this house, eat dinner with you, sleep next to you, while you were already somewhere else. While he had pieces of you that I thought were mine. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care anymore. What happened to us, Claire? I asked. Did I stop being enough? Did we stop being enough? She wiped her eyes. We stopped being us a long time ago, David. I just didn't know how to say it. That stung. Because deep down, I knew she wasn't entirely wrong. We had coasted, raised kids, paid bills, went through the motions. Somewhere along the way, we stopped being lovers and became business partners in a joint venture called marriage. But I still tried. I still believed we were in a rough patch. I thought if we just got through this year, or that job stress, or the next kid crisis, we'd find each other again. She didn't believe that anymore. Maybe she hadn't for years. I don't hate you, she said quietly. I just don't love you the way I used to. And there it was. The real eulogy. I got up, walked out of the room. Not because I was angry, but because if I stayed a second longer, I'd shatter. I went into the garage, closed the door, just sat there in the car, in the dark. I stared at the steering wheel and tried to remember the last time I felt truly loved by her. I couldn't. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my contacts, hesitated on one name. Tessa. I didn't call her, didn't message. I just stared at the screen and wondered what it meant that she was the one I wanted to octanel. Not to replace Claire, not to cheat, but because, for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone saw me. I stayed in the garage until it got cold. When I finally came back inside, Claire had gone to bed. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful, just hollow. A house filled with furniture, photographs, memories, but no warmth. Just like us. I lay down on the couch and stared at the ceiling for hours. Not thinking, just feeling. And right before I drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, I whispered to the dark, "This isn't over." Because it wasn't. The betrayal was done. The damage was real. But the aftermath? That was just getting started. There's something almost cruel about how normal life tries to carry on in the aftermath of a revelation like that. Dishes still pile up. The dog still needs to be walked. Your daughter still needs poster board for her volcano project, and your son still leaves his cleats in the middle of the damn hallway no matter how many times you tell him not to. But you're not the same. And you start noticing cracks in places you never thought to look. It had been 3 days since Claire admitted the affair. Since she said she didn't love me the way she used to. Since she walked up those stairs and left me sitting in the ashes of a marriage she had already burned to the ground. 3 days of pretending for the kids. 3 days of silence between us when they weren't around. And then Sunday came. We were invited to a friend's barbecue. Mutual friends. The kind who didn't know what was happening behind the curtains of our curated life. Claire insisted we go. For appearances, probably. Or maybe she wanted to remind herself she could still play the role. I didn't want to go. But I said yes. Because part of me wanted to see if I could still do it too. We showed up with a store-bought salad and the same forced smiles we'd used for years. I watched her turn it on, the laughter, the gentle touches on someone's arm mid-conversation, the easy charm. God, she was good at it. Watching her like that, it hit me. This is who she's been for months. Maybe years. A stranger wearing my wife's skin. At one point, I stepped away from the crowd and wandered into the backyard alone. Needed air. Needed space. I didn't know if I was going to cry or scream or just evaporate. That's when Mark showed up. Mark, my oldest friend. The guy who gave the toast at our wedding. The one who helped me move furniture into our first house when Claire and I couldn't afford movers. He handed me a beer. Looked at me like he already knew something was wrong. "You okay?" he asked, quiet. I nodded. Too fast. He raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, that's what I thought." I didn't answer. He stood next to me for a minute, just sipping his drink, letting the silence sit. And then he said, "I saw Claire. A few weeks ago. Downtown. With someone. I didn't move. She didn't see me. But I saw her. They were holding hands. Looked close." I finally turned to him. "Why didn't you say anything?" He shrugged. Didn't know if it was my place. Figured if it meant something, you'd already know. I laughed, bitter. Yeah, it meant something. He didn't press. Just clinked his bottle against mine. "You want to talk? You know where to find me." Later that night, after the barbecue, Claire and I drove home in silence. The kind that wasn't angry, just done. We pulled into the driveway. The porch light was on. It was one of those tiny details I'd installed years ago so she wouldn't come home to darkness. Now it just lit up the cracks. When we stepped inside, she started to walk toward the stairs like nothing had happened, like the whole night had been fine. But I stopped her. Do your friends know? I asked, suddenly. She froze. What? I stepped closer. Do they know you're in love with someone else? That you're sleeping with him while your kids eat dinner 10 feet away from me? Her voice got sharp. Keep your voice down. No, I said. Answer the question. She crossed her arms. I haven't told anyone. That made me laugh. No? Not even Emma. I said, watching her face. Boom. There it was. The twitch in her eye. The truth behind her silence. Jesus, I said, shaking my head. You lied to me and made her your alibi. Claire sighed, like I was the one exhausting her. David, I didn't want to blow up everything. I was trying to figure things out. You've already figured it out, I snapped. You're just waiting for the right moment to make it official. Her mouth opened, maybe to argue, maybe to explain, but I cut her off. You know what the saddest part is? I used to think if we ever ended, it would be dramatic. Someone throws a glass. Someone moves out in the middle of the night. But this? You're just fading out. Quietly. Like I'm something you can delete in the background. Her eyes started to fill, but I didn't care anymore. Because in that moment, the mask slipped. And I saw her for who she really was now. Not a villain. Not a monster. Just a woman who wanted out but didn't want to feel like the bad guy. And me? I was tired of being the one bleeding quietly so she could feel like the good one. I walked past her and up the stairs, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood what I needed to do next. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to chase. I was going to take my life back, piece by piece. And I'd start by reclaiming the one thing she never expected me to, my voice. I didn't leave right away. You'd think after a betrayal like that, I'd pack my things, slam the door, sleep in my car, whatever. But no. The truth is, when your entire life is built around someone, even someone who no longer loves you, you don't walk out the door. You peel yourself away, layer by layer. That Monday morning, I watched her get ready for work like nothing had happened. Same perfume, same blouse, same lie. She left with a kiss on the cheek for Lila, a reminder for Jamie to take his lunch. She didn't say goodbye to me, not even a glance. I stood at the kitchen sink, sipping coffee that had long gone cold, and realized something important. She thought I'd just accept it, that I'd roll over, keep the peace, make it easier for her to transition from wife to ex-wife without ever having to carry the guilt. But I wasn't going to be her soft landing. Not anymore. That evening, I sat down with a yellow legal pad and made a list. Not a revenge plan, not some movie-style retaliation. No, this was a blueprint for my own resurrection. 1. Lawyer up. Quietly. 2. Get financial records in order. Bank, retirement, joint accounts. 3. Talk to a therapist. Someone not afraid to call me out. 4. Document everything. 5. Protect the kids. At all costs. And then I added one last thing, in all caps, do not let her decide how this ends. The next morning, I called a lawyer during my lunch break. His name was Alan Myers. Calm voice. Sharp mind. I liked him immediately. He didn't flinch when I told him the situation. Didn't say sorry to hear that in that fake lawyer voice. He just said, all right, let's get you clear. That word, clear. It hit me like a shot of cold air. Because I hadn't been clear in months. Maybe years. I'd been walking through a fog, watching the woman I loved drift further away, trying to convince myself it was just temporary. But now I was ready to see things as they were. When I came home that night, Claire was in the kitchen, flipping through a Pottery Barn catalog like we weren't about to dismantle the life we built page by page. She looked up. You okay? It was the first thing she'd said to me in 2 days. I smiled. A real one, and it must have scared her, because she flinched. I'm great, I said. Just had a productive day. And I walked past her without another word. Upstairs, I pulled a small suitcase from the closet. Just a few clothes, some toiletries, a copy of Middlesex I hadn't finished. I wasn't leaving, not yet, but I wanted her to see the bag. Let her wonder. Let her feel something. The next day, I met Tessa for coffee. She didn't know the full story yet, and I hadn't intended to tell her. But when she looked at me, I felt the weight in my chest loosen just a bit. You ever feel like you're still in a relationship that ended months ago? I asked, stirring sugar into a drink I wasn't planning to finish. She nodded. Yeah, it's like being a ghost in your own house. I looked at her, surprised. Exactly. We sat in silence for a few seconds, the kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. And then she said, Without looking at me, you don't deserve to feel that small, David. Something about the way she said it, the conviction, the quiet kindness, shook something loose in me. I hadn't heard my own name said like that in a long time. Not like I was a burden, not like I was a problem to solve, but like I was a person, a man who deserved better. I didn't kiss her, didn't touch her. This wasn't about replacing Claire. This was about finally remembering who I was before Claire stopped seeing me. That night, when I got home, Claire was waiting for me, sitting on the couch, legs crossed, glass of wine untouched on the table. "Where were you?" she asked. "Out." She narrowed her eyes. "With who?" And just like that, the switch flipped. The mask slipped. Jealousy, not guilt, not regret, not sadness, just the need to control the narrative. I looked at her and said, very calmly, "Is that a serious question?" Her jaw tightened. "You don't get to ask me that, Claire. Not anymore." She stood up. "So now you're seeing someone? Are you serious right now?" I almost laughed. "You've been having an affair for 6 months. I go out for one afternoon and suddenly you're interrogating me?" "I'm just saying no," I cut her off. "You're not saying anything. Because you already said everything the night you came home smiling like you were 16 again." Silence. The quiet war. "You think I'm the bad guy," she finally said. "No," I said. "I think you're the coward." Her face crumpled then, whether from shame or anger, I couldn't tell. But I didn't stay to find out. I walked upstairs, closed the bedroom door, locked it, and for the first time in months, I slept soundly, because I'd made my choice. I wasn't going to be the man left behind. I was going to be the man who walked away with his dignity intact. 3 weeks after that night, everything looked the same on the surface. Same house, same coffee in the morning, same rhythm of two people brushing past each other in a kitchen too small for silence. But something had shifted. I'd stopped filling the air, stopped trying to patch the holes in our conversations, or ask how her day was, or pretend we were anything more than two people holding onto the shell of a marriage because it was easier than ripping it apart in front of the kids. Claire noticed it. She didn't say it out loud, but I could feel her watching me, studying me, like she was trying to figure out what had changed. What she didn't know was that I'd already started stepping away, quietly, deliberately. It started with the bank. I opened a new account in my name only, rerouted my direct deposit. No warning, no fireworks, just clean separation. Then the files. I scanned everything: mortgage paperwork, insurance, college savings. Backed it all up in a drive she didn't know about. It felt clinical, almost cold, but I needed something in my life that was mine again. Even therapy. Once a week, Wednesday mornings. An older guy named Martin. Ex-military, no nonsense, with the kind of quiet that makes you talk more than you want to. He listened to everything, never interrupted, just watched me come apart in pieces and said things like, "You're not angry enough," or "That's grief talking, not love." One session I said, "I think I stayed too long because I was scared of the quiet." And he just nodded and said, "Sometimes we'd rather sit in a burning house than step into the cold." That stuck with me, because that was exactly it. Claire and I had been sitting in the ashes of something that used to be a fire, pretending it was still warm. But I was done pretending. What really pushed me, though, what lit the fuse, was Jamie. My son, 12 years old, quiet like me, smart, sensitive in that way boys try to hide. He came into my office one night while I was working on the custody folder. "Dad," he said, "are you and Mom okay?" I looked at him. That face I helped bring into the world. That face that didn't deserve this storm. I wanted to lie. God, I wanted to lie. But something in me broke. I closed the folder, knelt down in front of him, and said, "We're not. But that's not your fault. And no matter what happens, I'm always your dad. Always here." He nodded, looked down, then whispered something I'll never forget. "I hear you guys at night." My heart cracked clean in half. "I just wanted to stop," he added. That was it. No more waiting. No more calculated detachment. No more pretending to keep it together for the kids when the kids already knew. I made my move. The next morning, I sat Claire down. She was sipping her tea, scrolling on her phone, like it was any other Thursday. "I spoke to a lawyer," I said. Her head snapped up. "I want joint custody. 50-50. And we need to start separating the finances." "I've already started." The color drained from her face. "David, wait. You're serious?" "I'm done waiting for you to finish leaving me," I said. "So I'm finishing it for both of us." Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, she didn't have a comeback. No script. No defense. Just shock. "You said you didn't love me the way you used to." "Fine. But that doesn't mean I'm going to rot here while you work through your guilt. She set the mug down. Her hands were shaking. Is there someone else? She asked quietly. Ah, now it made sense. She wasn't hurt that I was leaving. She was hurt I might be the one with a secret now. No, I said honestly. There's no one else. Just me. And for the first time in a long time, that's enough. And I meant it. Tessa? She was a moment. A breath. A reminder that I was still seen. But she wasn't the reason I was walking away. I was walking away because I had finally remembered who I was before Claire stopped loving me. And I liked that man. I told her we'd work out the timeline. Talk to the kids together. Be fair. But I also made it clear I wasn't going to cushion her landing anymore. She looked at me then, really looked. And for the first time since that night she came home glowing from another man's arms, I saw it. Fear. Not of me. Not of the divorce. But of the realization that I wasn't the same man she had left behind. Because I wasn't. That man was gone. And the man sitting across from her now? He was finally free. There are things you rehearse in your head 1,000 times, thinking the repetition will make it easier. Telling your kids you're getting divorced is not one of them. I'd played it over and over in my mind. What words to use, where we'd sit, how to soften the blow. But when the day finally came, none of that mattered. Nothing prepares you for the look in your daughter's eyes when her world starts to tilt. Claire and I sat side by side on the couch. That alone was strange. We hadn't sat that close in weeks. She wore that neutral expression she'd mastered over the years. Not cold. Not warm. Just blank. Lila sat cross-legged on the rug, still wearing her soccer jersey. Jamie curled up in the recliner, earbuds dangling from his neck. He already looked like he didn't want to be there. Claire opened her mouth to speak, but I cut in. Not out of dominance. Out of mercy. I'll start, I said quietly. The words came slowly, like walking through water. Each sentence dragging the weight of 2 decades behind it. Mom and I have been going through some changes, I began. We've been trying to work through things, but we've come to a decision together. Claire flinched slightly at that word, together, because we both knew she had already made her decision long ago. We've decided, I said, that we're going to separate. Lila's head snapped up. Her mouth opened, then shut again. She looked to her mother first. Claire just nodded softly. Jamie didn't move. He stared at his hands, the same way I used to when I didn't want anyone to see I was falling apart. It's not your fault, I said, immediately. It has nothing to do with you. We both love you more than anything. That's never going to change. Silence. I heard the clock ticking in the kitchen. The dog's tags jingling upstairs. The small, normal things that suddenly felt offensive in their ordinariness. Then, finally, Lila spoke. Are you getting a divorce? Claire took that one. We're going to separate first. See how things go. But yes, eventually, yes. Lila's lip trembled. So that's it. No, I said quickly, leaning forward. It's not the end. It's just a different version of our family. One where you still have both of us, just not in the same house. Jamie still hadn't said a word. Claire looked at him. Honey. He stood up, abruptly. I knew. My heart stopped. I heard you guys, he said. Fighting. Crying. Not talking. I knew something was wrong. Claire's voice broke. Jamie, he held up a hand. I'm not mad. I don't know what to feel. That's when I stood and walked to him, put a hand on his shoulder. He didn't shrug me off, but he didn't lean in either. He was holding it in, like me. Lila, on the other hand, was already crying. Claire went to her, pulled her close, and I just watched. It hit me then. This was the last time we'd ever be this kind of family again. The 4 of us, under one roof, holding space in the same silence. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed and Claire retreated to the guest room, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the half-packed suitcase. This wasn't just about leaving a marriage. It was leaving a version of myself I had held onto out of duty, fear, and a twisted form of love that had long since expired. I opened my phone. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Or hope. There was a message from Tessa. Thinking of you. You don't know me anything, but if you ever need to breathe, I'm here. I didn't reply right away. I just sat there, holding the phone in my palm like it was a compass, wondering if I even deserved that kind of kindness. The next morning, Claire made pancakes. For the kids. Not for me. She didn't say a word when I walked in. Just passed the syrup across the table, her eyes tired, her shoulders sagging in a way I hadn't seen before. Maybe the weight of it was finally sinking in. I sat, poured myself coffee, and watched Lila quietly doodle on her napkin while Jamie stared at his plate like it had betrayed him. There was no yelling, no drama, no thrown plates or slammed doors. Just the quiet unraveling of a life we had built one brick at a time. And in that silence, I made myself a promise. I would not let this break me. Not for Claire. Not for the kids. Not for the story I thought we were supposed to be living. I would rebuild. On my terms. I would be more than the man she left. I would become the man I left behind. The house looked the same, but everything inside had shifted. That's the thing about endings. They don't always come with screaming and shattered glass. Sometimes they come quietly, with drawer dividers, separate grocery lists, and the haunting absence of a we. Claire and I still shared the house. Temporarily. For the kids. That's what we told ourselves. But every hallway felt narrower. Every shared space tighter. There were rules now. Unspoken ones. Don't ask where the other's been. Don't linger in the same room too long. Don't bring up the past unless you're ready to reopen a wound. She slept in the guest room. I stayed in ours. Not because I won some unspoken contest, but because I didn't want the kids to feel like I was the one who'd been pushed out. That room had history. It held our wedding photo. A drawer full of birthday cards she'd written over the years. I read one of them one night, our 10th anniversary, and I swear to God, it was like someone else had written it. I'd choose you again and again. I held that card for a long time, staring at the handwriting I used to know by heart. Then I put it in the trash. That was the night I finally looked in the mirror and asked the question I'd been avoiding. What do I have left, if not her? The answer came slowly. Me. That's what I had. Not the version of me that she knew. Or the one I'd molded over 2 decades to fit neatly into the outline of her expectations. But the real me. The one who used to write poetry before the mortgage bills came. The one who played guitar in the garage at midnight just to feel something. The one who laughed with his whole chest instead of holding it back to keep the peace. So I started showing up for myself. I dusted off the old guitar case. Took it out one night after the kids were asleep. Sat on the porch and played for the first time in years. It was rough. My fingers ached. My voice cracked. But it was mine. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a man grieving a ghost. I felt alive. The next day, I called my brother. We hadn't spoken much since the separation started. I'd kept things vague. He always said Claire had a sharpness to her, even in the early days. I guess I didn't want to give him a reason to say, I told you so. But he didn't say that. He just said, it's about damn time you remembered who you are. We made plans to meet for a drink that weekend. After that, I texted Tessa. Nothing dramatic. Just, you free for coffee this week? She replied within minutes, always. That made me smile. Genuinely smile. But I didn't see her as an escape anymore. That would have been easy. No, she was a mirror. One that didn't distort. One that didn't expect me to fit into the shape of who I used to be. When we met, she didn't ask for the update. She didn't press. She just looked at me and said, you look different. I didn't ask if that was a good thing. I just nodded. I feel different. We walked. Talked about anything but Claire. Music. Books. Regrets. Not the kind that ruin you, just the kind that teach you something. And somewhere between coffee and dusk, she said something that stuck with me. You know, she said, I think sometimes the betrayal isn't just that someone stopped loving you. It's that they made you stop loving yourself. That hit harder than I expected. Because she was right. That's what had happened. Somewhere between my compromises and her silences, I had become a ghost of the man I once was. But not anymore. That night, I came home to find Claire in the kitchen. She looked up. Her face unreadable. Maybe she noticed the change. Maybe she didn't. But I did. And that was enough. I walked past her, up the stairs, into the room that used to belong to both of us. Now, it was just mine. I closed the door, picked up my guitar, and played. Not to forget. Not to numb. But to remember who the hell I was. There's a moment in every story, right before the end, where everything sharpens. The noise quiets. The distractions fall away. And you're left with nothing but the truth. It was a Sunday. Bright. Too bright. The kind of morning where everything looks cleaner than it actually is. The sunlight poured through the living room window, catching the dust in the air like glitter. Claire was sitting at the dining table when I walked in, sipping tea, barefoot, legs curled up like she used to do in college when she'd study for finals. Funny, how even in the ruins, your brain can still find tenderness. I was going to head straight for the coffee machine. Avoid the moment. Keep the silence alive. But she looked up and said, can we talk? And for once, I didn't flinch. Yeah, I said. We should. I sat down across from her, not out of habit, not out of obligation, but because it was time. I've signed the papers, she said, sliding the envelope across the table. I had them notarized yesterday. I nodded. Didn't touch the envelope. Just let it sit there like the ghost of our marriage. I didn't think it would happen like this, she added. No one ever does, I said. She laughed, but it came out hollow. Do you hate me? I looked at her. Really looked at her. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired sleep can fix, but the kind you carry when you've lied to yourself long enough that the truth becomes heavier than the secret. I did, I said honestly. At first. Then I hated myself. For not seeing it. For not being enough. For holding on too long. But now, I shrugged. No, I don't hate you. I think we just stopped speaking the same language. She blinked fast, like that caught her off guard. Maybe she expected rage. Or guilt. Or a last desperate plea. But I was done begging. You could have told me sooner, I said. Before the affair. Before the pretending. We could have spared each other the slow bleed. I was scared, she admitted. Of what it would mean. Of starting over. We're both starting over, I said. The difference is, I didn't betray you to do it. That one landed. She looked down at her hands. I don't love him, you know, she said suddenly. I raised an eyebrow. What? The guy. The one eye, she trailed off. It wasn't about him. Not really. He just saw me. And I needed to feel like I mattered again. But it was selfish. And it cost me everything. I wanted to say something cruel. Something final. But all I said was, you mattered. Even when you stopped seeing me, I still saw you. Every day. And I kept showing up anyway. That silence between us? That wasn't a pause. It was a requiem. She wiped her eye and stood. Walked around the table and sat beside me. Not close. Just beside me. Do you think we were ever really happy? She asked. And I told her the truth. I think we were. For a while. But somewhere along the way, we stopped choosing each other. We sat there for a long time. Not touching. Not crying. Just breathing the same air one last time. Eventually, she stood and left the room. No dramatic exit. No final words. Just gone. I looked at the envelope again. Then I picked it up. Signed the papers. Folded the marriage into a neat stack of legal dissolution. That night, I moved into the apartment I'd quietly leased 2 weeks ago. A small place. Exposed brick. Quiet. The first night I slept there, I expected to feel alone. But I didn't. I felt light. Like I'd finally stepped out of the fog and into myself again. A week later, I took Lila and Jamie out for dinner. Just the three of us. Burgers and fries. We laughed. We didn't talk about the divorce. We didn't need to. They smiled. For real this time. And I knew we were going to be okay. One day, maybe I'll love again. Maybe not. But this time, it'll be different. Not because I'm afraid of the past, but because I finally know who I am. And that man? He's not a ghost anymore. He's alive. And he's never going back.